Welcome to Dublin Castle. I'm going to be making a little book today about Strongbow. Strongbow is an interesting person because he was one of the key people at the beginning of the Norman invasion, the conquest of Ireland, and we're going back here over 850 years. So that's quite interesting to step into the past. So for today's little book, it's a little booklet, we call it a zine. And it's got a number of pages and it has all of the story in that. So before we start to make it, I suggest that you download and print off the 3 sheets that come with this video. And these have all of the drawings that I've done for this particular booklet. Now you'll see most of the drawings are done as stickmen. They're very easy to do. So you can either cut out the ones that I have or you can draw your own. You'll find them very easy to do. And then before we begin, it's always useful to have a good bit of them cut out and ready to go. And the other thing we will need today in terms of the book itself is I use 2 pieces of coloured card, one for the front and one for the back. But again, that's up to yourself. That's your own design decision. And we have all of the little characters for the story. They're all cut out and ready to go. In terms of what else you're going to need, I suggest you have some markers to hand, colouring pencils, crayons, whatever you have at home. You're also going to need scissors. I use a little ruler as well to keep the pages flat, and a glue stick. And that's it. So, are we ready to begin? So I suggest as we go through, as we do all the pages and tell the story, you might want to pause it from time to time to do your own sticking, your own colouring and your own cutting out. So that's entirely up to you. So the other most important thing we need to make our book is a piece of A3 white paper. This is just ordinary photocopying paper. And to make the little booklet, we fold the piece of paper in half like this. Now, when you're making these booklets, I find it very useful to have a ruler to hand because you can just flatten the pages really, really well like this and you get a nice sharp crease. So we're going to do a second little fold, fold number 2. And again, we're going to take our ruler and we're just going to do a little bit of an old fold like that. And then we fold it again. So that's 3 folds we'd have done. And we're going to take our ruler and just do a little flattening like this. And then this helps us to make it look really, really sharp. So when you're finished, you should have a piece of paper folded this size. So then we're going to open up the piece of paper like this. And you'll see there's a nice little ridge here in the middle. So you're going to just put it up like this so we can see this nice ridge here in the middle. And then we're just going to make a cut down here. So take your scissors. See this? Take your scissors and make a little cut just here so that your page looks like this and it has this nice little loose bit at the end. So when you open it then, open it back out, you can see there is like a little beak-like structure there. So we want you to close it in like that. There you go, close it in. And then you will get a book this size. Give it an old flatten down and fold it again. Now, you have a little book and here are your pages. And you're ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do is the cover. So on our cover, we're going to do a little introduction all about Strongbow. So who was Strongbow? And why was he called that? And what was he like as a person? That's always interesting to know. So as we're doing the story, we're going to make a little cover. I've used green, but you can use any colour you like. And we're going to glue the cover onto the book. And this gives us a nice little finish on the whole book. So we've got the glue on. And now we're just going to stick that onto the thing. So we know that Strongbow was probably born sometime around 1130. That's a long time ago. It was his dad who was first called Strongbow. And we don't think that he was actually called Strongbow during his life. We think that he was just called by his name, Robert. and this is something which has just been written about him at a later stage, and he's been called Strongbow. So to make our cover, I've made a little drawing, and this is taken from his seal. So this was done when he was alive, and this was the seal he used to stick on his documents to prove that it was him. So I've done a little drawing from that. You can do your own little drawing. I've put him on a horse because a lot of the time when they were fighting or moving their armies, they really relied on their horses. So we're going to stick that on. There we go, a little bit of glue, and we're going to stick him on like that. So this is what I have so far. So now we're going to write his name. As I said, Strongbow was a name that people wrote about him later, but they probably didn't call him that when he was alive. But we put it on anyway because it's the name he's most well known here. Strongbow. There it is. It's on the thing. And we're going to put underneath it what his actual name was. So his full name was Richard Fitzgilbert de Clare, which is quite a long name. So I'm sure his parents just called him Richard. So let's put that on as his name. Richard Fitzgilbert de Clare. And there you have him. So that's our introduction to Strongbow. And you can colour that picture in later if you like. Sometimes I like to give his clothes and maybe make his horse an interesting colour. Or you can draw other things around it. Now this is only my design. Obviously you guys can go ahead and make your own designs. So the reason that Strongbow is interesting to people here in Ireland was he was one of the early Normans who came to Ireland at the beginning of the Norman conquest. He wasn't the first Norman. There was about 3 or 4 that came ahead of him the previous year and had started to take control of lands in Ireland. But I guess Strongbow is the most well known, and that's why he's a good person to actually talk about. So on the next page in our story, we're going to talk about Strongbow's arrival. So to do this, we're going to take this picture here. So this is Ireland, this is Leinster. You see that? Yeah, that's better. This is Leinster, so we're going to stick that on this side. Put that down there. And then we're going to stick Wales, because Strongbow was from Wales. And we're going to stick that on the other side. So here we go. So now we have Ireland on this side, and we have Wales on this side. So let's just talk for a moment about Wales. This is Chepstow Castle. This is where Strongbow lived. And this is Bristol. And Bristol is a very important part of our story. So what's happening in Ireland at the time is that there had been fighting between the various Irish kings, and Dermot MacMurrough, who was the king of Leinster, had lost. And because of that, he was exiled from Ireland, which meant that he was told, you cannot live here anymore. So Dermot MacMurrough left with his wife and his daughter, Aoife, and they travelled around looking for people to help them to get their land back. And so in the end, they travelled to Bristol in the south of Wales, south of England, close to Wales, and there they met Strongbow. And this is Dermot MacMurrough here. This is my picture of Dermot MacMurrough. You might want to have a different one. So he was a very important Irish king. I haven't given him a crown at this point in the story because he wasn't king of anything at this stage because he had lost his land. So he met Strongbow, and Dermot MacMurrough said, will you help me get my land back? And Dermot and Strongbow said, yep, I will help you get your land back in Ireland. And so they made a deal. If Strongbow came to Ireland to help him, he would be rewarded with land and wealth, and also with Dermot MacMurrough's daughter in marriage, and her name was Aoife, but we're going to meet her in the next page. So let's just put in that little conversation between Dermot MacMurrough and Strongbow. So I don't know what they had said that day, but I'm guessing that Dermot MacMurrough said, will you help me get my land back? And I'm guessing Strongbow said okay. Now, he probably didn't use that language because I'm not sure that okay was something that he would have said at that time. But anyway, we'll do it as we know the story. So there he is. So there's Dermot McMurrough. He's saying, will you help me get my land back? And Strongbow saying, okay. So Strongbow then had to go and organise an army. And he had decided that he was going to sail out from Milford Haven, which is here. And from there then he'd sail to Ireland. So we have to get an army going now for Strongbow. And so for the army, I am using 2 of these little, can you see them there? The little mounted Normans. And I'm going to stick them on, and they're heading for Milford Haven, which is where Strongbow set out for Ireland. Let's put them on there. Going the wrong way, we get a better one this way here. So here is Strongbow's army heading from Milford Haven, from his home in Chepstow Castle. So they then need to sail across the sea. So let's put in the sea and the boats. So the sea is blue. And you can all draw in the sea whatever way you like, whatever you think is good. I'm going to just use 2 blues, a slightly darker one, and I'm going to use a slightly lighter one. And we're going to put in some sea. So there you can see I've put in the sea. Now we're going to have the boats. So we have some boats here cut out. Again, you can draw these yourself, or you can take the ones that I have printed out. And we're going to sail these boats across the Irish Sea, all the way down to the south of Ireland. And we're going to have them heading in. So, here we go. So Strongbow sailed on these boats all around the south of Ireland, and he was aiming for Waterford. So he went up the estuary here, and he landed close to a place called Passage East. You might know it, there's a small ferry there nowadays. And they headed for Waterford. And they attacked Waterford and basically tried to take control of the city. So there was a big battle there. And the Normans were very, very clever in their warfare, and they spotted a little weakness in the walls, the way the wall was constructed, and they really focused their effort on that weakness until they got a hole in the wall. So we're going to just put in a few of our little Norman archers there, because they were a very important part of that battle. Here they are. These are my little, teeny tiny little archers. Do you see these? And we're going to put these on now, because these guys are attacking Waterford. I'm going to stick a few on here. There we go, and you get a 3rd one because there was a lot of them attacking Waterford that day. So Waterford, like many of the cities at the time, was a walled city, which meant that there was a wall all the way around the outside, and that was there to protect the city against attacks just like this. So we're going to just put in Waterford as well, because we need to know where Waterford is. There it is in our little drawings. So when they got out of their boats, they marched to Waterford, and when they arrived at Waterford, they attacked the city, and they took control of it eventually after a battle. And so this is them taking control, and this is where Waterford is. Some of you might know that one. So that was the beginning. This is Strongbow arriving in Ireland. And you might remember when he did the deal with Dermot McMurrough about coming to Ireland, Dermot said, and you can marry my daughter if you're successful. So he said, look, we've taken Waterford, I am successful, therefore I get to marry your daughter. Now that was important because as his son-in-law, Strongbow would get to inherit Dermot McMurrough's land when he died. And at that stage, Dermot McMurrough was about 70 years old, so he wasn't a young man. And the chances were he didn't really have a long life after that. Back in those days, if you got to the age of 70, well, that was highly unusual. And very unusual that somebody would live that long. So Strongbow was very hopeful, if I marry his daughter, then I will get to inherit his lands, which at the time was all of Leinster. Big, big area here. And this is the reason why the Normans had come to Ireland. They didn't really come to help Dermot MacMurrough. They came to get land for themselves. And so this is why they did it. So now we're going to go to the next page of our little book. And we're going to think about Strongbow marrying Aoife. So his daughter's name was Aoife. And we have a little drawing here of them. So this is Strongbow and Aoife getting married. And we're going to pop that one in here. So Strongbow at the time was about 40 years old. And Aoife was only about 17. So it's sort of an unusual marriage from that point of view, but it was very typical of those days because families that were kings or leaders of their clans, sometimes they married their children off to help them get power and land and to secure deals in relation to the power and the land. So the fact that she had to marry who her father asked her to marry, that was not unusual for those days, and I imagine that she probably went along with that. She would have seen the importance of it at the time. So there we go. So then we have Strongbow and Aoife getting married. So after that, Strongbow decides his next target will be Dublin, the most important city. So he assembled an army. His army, we're going to do them, it's on horseback, and they're going to head in a big long line, and they're going to head for Dublin. Now, the interesting thing about it in those days, if somebody was going from Waterford to Dublin, they would go all the way around the mountains. You wouldn't cut across the Wicklow Mountains. They would have gone around the mountains. And other Irish kings had heard that Dermot MacMurrough had brought in some Normans. And so in order to try and catch them out and attack them, they set up an army camp to the west of Dublin. But Strongbow and Dermot MacMurrough got to hear about this, and so they decided that they would go over the mountains, which at the time was an unusual route because there was no proper road. It was just tracks, and it was very hard going, to be honest with you, going over the mountains. You can imagine small little narrow paths made maybe by deer, very small spaces that they had to go through. But by doing that, they managed to arrive in Dublin, avoid the armies waiting to catch them, and they were able to get straight to Dublin itself. So that was actually a really good plan. So we're just going to put them in marching over these little tracks, and they're heading for Dublin. We give them a signpost at the very end because that was useful for them. Not that they would have had signposts at that time. So there we go, we got a little signpost. So, with this part of the story, as you can see, I've put them all marching along on this little tiny track, and they're heading for Dublin. So now we're going to put in Dublin. Well, we're not going to draw all of Dublin because even then it was quite big. So we're just going to draw the small little bit that they attacked. So for Dublin, I have drawn this little bit here. And this, you see the walls of Dublin and you see the tops of the buildings as they would have been then. So we're going to pop that into our drawing. I'm going to put glue on that. And then we're going to pop it in here. So there we go. So there's all of the soldiers and they're marching for Dublin. So when they got to Dublin, they had decided they would attack it. So once again, we're going to get our archers and show them attacking it. Now in this drawing, as you can see, I've already anticipated that they managed to make a hole in the wall and actually get into Dublin. But let's add the archers anyway, and the little soldiers. So the little archers, we're going to stick them like this and pop them around Dublin. And get another one. Here he is. Got them attacking it, and then we'll put in a couple of Norman knights because they were there as well. They didn't all have bows. They weren't all archers, so we're going to put in some ordinary the knights as well. My little Norman knights. So again, you guys can draw this as you choose. I'm just using pre-cut drawings because it's handy here. So there we go. We have Dublin is being attacked by all of these archers and the knights. And they managed to make a hole in the wall and in they went. And so on that way, they managed to control Dublin, which was a very important place because Dublin was a seaport. And so if you wanted to go to parts of England, you would sail out of Dublin. And it was quite a well-defended city at the time because the River Poddle went around two sides of it and the River Liffey around the other side. And so whilst they did have walls, they were also really well protected by rivers at the time. And so to finish this bit of the story, we have Strongbow. Here he is. It's big Strongbow. Strongbow is now in control of Dublin. And that's a very important stepping stone because this gives him control of a very important seaport. So I'm just going to put him there at the top. And there he is. Oh, he's sticking at the top. So there he is, Strongbow. He's in control of Dublin. So this is what I suppose you'd call the beginning of the Norman conquest, the Normans coming to Ireland. And the next part of our story is going to take us to the following year. So, here's the next bit. So we know that Strongbow was from Wales, and Wales was controlled by the English king, King Henry II. And King Henry II didn't really like Strongbow because Strongbow hadn't supported King Henry II's mother when he was a young man. And that was very important because Henry was still annoyed at Strongbow. And so when Strongbow came to Ireland and started to take over all of this land, King Henry II was worried because he thought Strongbow was trying to set himself up as a rival king in Ireland. And so Henry II decided, well, he should come over next and sort everything out. Now, Strongbow still wanted to be friends with King Henry II. So he said, I will submit to you. So that means he was saying he wasn't being King of Ireland. He was going to let Henry II take control of that land. And Henry II said, okay, so I will then give you back the land that you have just promised to me. And this was a medieval way of the kings controlling the land, but it's still being ruled by people like Strongbow. So we're going to draw a nice next little picture, which is King Henry II arriving in Ireland. And there's the little finished one that I've done. It's got lots of sea in it because he came by sea. So we're going to put in this nice little picture of Ireland. And this shows that at the time when he arrived, there was a strong Norman colony in Dublin, in Wexford, and in Waterford. And when King Henry II arrived, I'm going to put a map in there, when King Henry II arrived, lots of the other kings in Ireland looked at what was going on and they submitted to King Henry II, which is kind of surprising. But I'll tell you why in a minute, because it was a very important part of the medieval culture in Ireland. But first we're going to draw in some of the sea. Think about Ireland, and we're going to put two colours. I like to have two colours in my sea, because if you ever look at the sea, it isn't actually just one colour. And now we're going to have King Henry II. He's going to arrive on a little boat, little sailing boat. I made him look really big so that we know he's different to all the other knights. And this little picture here that I made of him, this is taken from, the idea for this is taken from a very old portrait of him. And so this, he has his scepter here and his crown, and that shows that he is the king. And at the time, of course, King Henry wasn't just King of England, he also controlled parts of France. So he was a powerful guy. So we're going to have him here arriving on his boat. And he brought with him nearly 5,000 soldiers and knights and archers and attendants. So we're going to put in a few more boats just to show how many people came. It was a huge army. So it's sort of hard for us to imagine what 5,000 soldiers coming from England would have felt like for the Irish at the time. So in Ireland at that time, the Irish kings, they all ruled their own kingdoms. And so they didn't think of Ireland as one whole country as we do now. So they thought of it as their kingdoms of Leinster and Meath and Thomond, and Desmond in Munster and Ulster, and they'd all these different. Ireland was in about between 9 and 11 different kingdoms, and those kings, they really thought mainly about their own land and their own families, and sometimes they would be involved in battles against other Irish kings. So when the Normans came and King Henry II came, they just saw this as another power. They didn't necessarily see it as a threat to the whole island. And so some of the kings looked at Henry II and his huge army, and they decided it would be better if we aligned ourselves and we became friends with this new big army, because we don't want to be their enemy. But they didn't regard that as a final permanent thing, because sometimes their friendships changed over those years. So we have here, I'm going to show you his army arriving. So there's Henry II and all of the boats full of his army. And again, you can draw these in yourself anyway, or you can have a look at those ones there. So King Henry II spent 6 months in Ireland, travelled around Ireland. Lots of Irish kings would have submitted to him, paid homage to him. But after he left in 1172, there was a lot of changes in the Irish political landscape between the kings, and they didn't always think that was a permanent arrangement. Many of them then went back to their battles with their own neighbouring kings. But anyway, at the time that Henry II was here, he spent 6 months travelling around Ireland. He spent a lot of time in Dublin as well, where he set up a little encampment there, and many kings came to visit him in Dublin. And so I guess you would call the arrival of King Henry II as the beginning of English rule in Ireland. And for those of you who've looked at the longer piece of history, you will see that this English, later British rule goes on until the 16th of January 1922. So 750 years of history. And it begins with Strongbow and it ends with the handover at Dublin Castle. And that's going to be our next story. But before we get to that, we're just going to the final page, which is what happened to Strongbow in the end. So we're going to put our little final bit of colour. I like to make a back for our book, because it makes it more like a good book. And there we go. We just put that there. So we're just going to stick this on. This is the back of our book. And then any of you who might have been to visit Christchurch Cathedral in Dublin will know that Strongbow is buried there. So Strongbow died in, my dates here, Strongbow died on the 20th of April, 1176. So he was only really in Ireland for about 6 years. He did a lot during that time, though, in fairness to him. He did a lot. So there we go. So there we have Strongbow in his tomb. So this is a drawing that I've done, taken from his actual tomb, which is still in Christchurch Cathedral. And so we're just going to do a little writing on the top and just say that Strongbow died. Wrong pen. Let's get the better pen. And there we go. Nice thicker pen. Strongbow. He died on the 20th of April, 1176. He's buried in Christchurch. And at the time that he died, we know that he had married Aoife, and himself and Aoife had 2 children. The oldest one was his son called Gilbert. Now, unfortunately, Gilbert didn't survive childhood, which is not unusual for children in those days. A lot of children didn't survive. And then he had a daughter called Isabel. So Isabel, when she grew up, she married a very important Norman called William Marshall. And they had a lot of children, and many of the kings and queens of England were later descended from her and her husband. So you can see that these were very important people, really, for hundreds of years afterwards. And I guess that's one of the reasons why Strongbow is quite an important person to know about. He was just one Norman. He came when other Normans came, but as I say, he's probably the most well known in terms of those people. So this is the final page here. Final page of our book. We've got our cover, we've got our picture, and we've got our little bits of information about him. And that's the story of Strongbow. So please feel free to make this book whatever way you like. This is my little design, but you can make it any way you like. So thank you very much.